Ever get the feeling like maybe, just maybe, the whole idea of humans being inherently good is, well, kind of a fairy
Oh,
tale?
I know exactly what you mean. Like deep down, maybe we're not all that peaceful and kind after all.
Yeah, like maybe it's all just wishful thinking.
Hmm.
And that unsettling thought brings us to today's deep dive because we're tackling a book that throws that nice, comfortable idea right out the window. We're talking Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy.
That's a powerful way to put it. You're not kidding about Blood Meridian shattering any illusions about inherent goodness. It's a raw, brutal, and sometimes really tough look at the dark side of human nature. And it doesn't shy away from anything.
And it all plays out against a backdrop of American history that was pretty brutal in its own right. So for anyone out there thinking about picking this one, as they say, but without giving away any major spoilers, we want you to experience the story for yourself.
Exactly. Consider this your guide to the terrain, but we're leaving the actual exploration up to you.
Sounds good to me. So first things first, who is this guy who decided to dive head first into all this darkness?
Cormac McCarthy, right?
That's the man, Cormac McCarthy, American novelist. He was born way back in 1933 and unfortunately passed away just last year.
Okay, so fairly recent, but still had a long career. What's the quick rundown on his writing style?
Well, he became known for writing these incredibly powerful stories, often set in the American West or the South. And violence, especially really stark, unflinching violence, is a recurring theme. He wasn't afraid to show the darkness.
So not exactly writing lighthearted rom-coms then.
Not exactly, no. And he had this very distinctive writing style. Very spare, very lean, not a lot of extra fluff.
You know, it's interesting. I read that he spent his early years in Tennessee, but then later moved to the Southwest. And that's exactly where Blood Meridian takes place, right?
You got it. The setting is a huge part of the book. It takes place in the 1850s, specifically in that wild, lawless region along the Texas-Mexico border.
That's a time and a place that already has so much built-in tension, just historically speaking. Right. And Blood Meridian was published in 1985, but it's still grappling with the legacy of the Mexican-American War, which had just happened a few decades earlier. The whole concept of manifest destiny, that belief that America was destined to expand across the continent no matter the cost, is a huge undercurrent in the book.
So we've got this historical backdrop, and we've got this author who's known for unflinching violence and a really stripped-down writing style. But what's at the heart of Blood Meridian? What are the big ideas McCarthy's trying to wrestle with?
In a nutshell, it's about the brutal reality of westward expansion and the nature of violence itself. It really forces you to confront the dark side of human nature, the capacity for cruelty that we all have within us.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it doesn't exactly sound like a relaxing read.
No, definitely not beach reading material.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of different ways to interpret what McCarthy's saying about violence. Some people see it through a really nihilistic lens, meaning they think the book is basically saying that life is meaningless and there's no real purpose to anything.
Okay, I can see how someone might get that from a book about the dark side of humanity.
Right. But other people see it more as a kind of tragedy, specifically a Gnostic tragedy.
Gnostic tragedy. Now, there's a term I haven't heard before.
It's a pretty complex idea, but basically it suggests that the physical world itself is flawed or even evil, and that true enlightenment comes from escaping this material realm.
So the violence in the book is kind of a symptom of a deeper cosmic problem.
You can see it that way, yeah. It's definitely open to interpretation, which is part of what makes it so fascinating.
Now, did McCarthy just come up with all this out of thin air, or was he drawing on real events?
That's one of the things that makes this book even more chilling. He actually based it on real events, loosely. The main plot is inspired by the true story of this gang of scalp hunters in the 1840s, led by a guy named John Joel Glanton.
Scalp hunters? That's already sending shivers down my spine.
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, but get this. Even the character of Judge Holden, who is one of the most memorable and unsettling characters in the book, is rooted in reality.
Wait, seriously? There was a real-life Judge Holden?
Well, not exactly a carbon copy, but there are striking similarities. One of Glanton's gang members was a guy named Samuel Chamberlain. He actually wrote a memoir about his experiences called My Confession, Recollections of a Rogue. And in it, he describes someone who sounds a lot like Judge Holden. It's kind of eerie how closely McCarthy's character aligns with this historical figure.
So we've got a story based on real-life scalp hunters, possibly inspired by a real-life villain. That's intense. You mentioned earlier that Blood Meridian marked a bit of a shift in McCarthy's career. What do you mean by that?
Well, before Blood Meridian, most of his writing fell into the category of Southern Gothic.
Hmm.
Think crumbling mansions, shadowy figures, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I get it. Like Faulkner, but maybe even more bleak.
You're on the right track. But with Blood Meridian, he really dove headfirst into the Western genre. And that's a direction he continued to explore in a lot of his later books. The Border Trilogy, for instance, which includes All the Pretty Horses, The Crossing, and Cities the Plain.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's No Country for Old Men, which a lot of people know from the movie.
Oh, yeah. No Country for Old Men. That's a fantastic movie. And the book is even better.
Absolutely. But yeah, Blood Meridian was kind of his first big foray into the Western.
Interesting. So, with a book this intense, with this much violence and darkness, did it make him instantly famous?
It's funny because you might expect a book like this to either explode onto the scene or completely bomb,
Hmm.
right? But it was kind of neither. McCarthy had been writing for a while before Blood Meridian, but he wasn't a household name by any means.
So, it wasn't a runaway success right out of the gate.
Not really. It got some attention, but it wasn't until later that it really started to gain recognition as his masterpiece.
Kind of like a slow burn.
Yeah, exactly. Over time, critics and readers started to recognize just how powerful and important this book was. Nowadays, you'll find a lot of people who consider it to be not just McCarthy's best work, but one of the greatest American novels ever written.
Wow, that's quite a statement.
It is. And some pretty big names in the literary world agree with that assessment. Harold Bloom, the famous literary critic, once said that Blood Meridian is the greatest single book since Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. That's high praise coming from someone like him.
So, it definitely found its audience eventually, but I'm guessing there were some pretty strong reactions when it first came out, both good and bad.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, this book is not for everyone. It's challenging, it's disturbing, and it can really stick with you long after you finish reading it. There's one review from Kirkus Reviews that kind of sums up the spectrum of reactions. They describe the book as grandiose, feverish, opaque.
Grandiose, feverish, opaque. It's almost poetic how much that captures the book's essence in just 3 words. But what exactly did they mean by that?
Well, grandiose speaks to the sheer ambition and scope of the novel. It's a sweeping epic with these larger-than-life characters who often feel allegorical. McCarthy is trying to say something really profound about human nature and the nature of violence, and that comes across in the way he structures the story.
And the feverish part, I'm guessing that has something to do with the violence?
You got it. The violence in Blood Meridian is relentless. It's graphic, it's brutal, and it's almost constant. Some critics felt like he was too much, that McCarthy was maybe even reveling in the bloodshed. They described it as a spaghetti western without a hero, where the focus is solely on the violence and there's no real sense of good versus evil.
Yeah, I can see how that could be overwhelming for some readers. And then there's opaque. What did they mean by that?
That refers to the writing style. McCarthy's prose is incredibly dense and often difficult to penetrate. He uses a lot of archaic language, words you might need a dictionary to understand, and he writes in these incredibly long, winding sentences that can be hard to follow. It's definitely not a book you can just skim through.
So it sounds like it's not just the content that's challenging, but the way it's written as well.
Exactly. That's one of the things that makes it such a divisive book. Some people absolutely love the writing style. They find it poetic and powerful. Others find it frustrating and pretentious. It all comes down to personal taste, I guess.
We keep coming back to this Judge Holden character. He seems to be at the center of a lot of the controversies surrounding the book. What is it about him that's so captivating or so repulsive, depending on your perspective?
Well, he's kind of a hard character to pin down. He's been described as a hairless god or devil figure, which gives you a sense of how unsettling he is. He's incredibly intelligent, almost superhumanly so. He's a master of languages. He understands science and philosophy, and he's even capable of feats of physical strength and endurance that seem impossible. But he's also completely ruthless and amoral. He seems to revel in violence and destruction. And he has this whole philosophy about the nature of power and the meaninglessness of human life that's really chilling.
He sounds like the embodiment of everything the book is trying to explore.
Yeah, he's kind of a walking, talking representation of the darkness that lies at the heart of humanity. And he's one of the main reasons why people have such strong reactions to the book. You either love him or you hate him, but you definitely can't ignore him.
And that Kirkus review we talked about, they actually quoted Judge Holden, right?
They did. They quoted a passage where he's talking about God and basically saying that if God intended to intervene in human affairs, he would have done it already. Pretty bleak outlook, and it kind of sums up the nihilistic worldview that a lot of people see in the book.
So we've talked about the historical context, the major themes, the controversy, and the writing style. Now, for someone who's actually considering reading Blood Meridian, what can we tell them about the likely reader reactions? Based on what we've discussed, what kind of experience can they expect?
Well, like we've said, this book is not for the faint of heart. If you're easily disturbed by violence or if you're looking for a light, uplifting read, this is definitely not the book for you.
That's putting it mildly.
The violence is graphic, it's unrelenting, and it can be really hard to stomach. And even if you can handle the violence, the writing style can be a major hurdle. It's dense, it's complex, and it requires a lot of effort on the reader's part.
So it's safe to say that a lot of people probably bounce off this book pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair assessment. But for those who stick with it, for those who are willing to put in the work and really engage with the text, it can be a deeply rewarding experience.
Okay, so what kind of reader are we talking about here? Who's the ideal audience for Blood Meridian?
I think it appeals to people who are drawn to challenging literature, to books that make you think and feel things you might not be comfortable with.
So not your typical airport bookstore fare.
Definitely not.
All right.
It's a book for people who are interested in exploring the dark side of human nature, who are fascinated by history, and who appreciate a truly unique and powerful writing style. It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
Now, let's dive a little deeper into some of the literary elements of the book. You mentioned earlier that the characters often feel allegorical. Can you expand on that a bit?
Sure. The characters in Blood Meridian aren't your typical three-dimensional characters with complex backstories and motivations. They often feel more like archetypes, representing different aspects of human nature or different philosophical ideas.
So they're more like symbols than real people.
You could say that. For example, you have the kid, who's the main character. He's kind of a blank slate, a young, naive figure who's thrust into this world of unimaginable brutality. He represents innocence, but also the potential for corruption.
And then you have Judge Holden, who we've already talked about quite a bit. What does he represent?
He's a much more complex figure, and there's a lot of debate about what he symbolizes. Some people see him as the embodiment of evil, pure and simple. Others see him as a force of nature, a kind of chaotic energy that's beyond good and evil. Still, others see him as a representation of the human intellect, capable of great things, but also capable of great destruction.
So there's no easy answer when it comes to Judge Holden.
Not at all. That's one of the things that makes him such a fascinating character. And then you have other characters like the Fool and the ex-priest, who also seem to carry symbolic weight. But it's up to the reader to interpret what they represent.
It sounds like McCarthy really wants the reader to think for themselves, to come to their own conclusions about the characters and the meaning of the story.
Exactly. He doesn't provide easy answers, and he doesn't spell everything out for you. He throws you into this world and lets you figure it out for yourself.
Now, we've touched on McCarthy's writing style a few times, but it's worth digging into a little deeper. What makes it so unique, and how does it contribute to the overall impact of the book?
Well, one of the things that immediately jumps out is his sparse use of punctuation. He hardly ever uses commas, and he often connects sentences with and instead of periods. This creates a kind of breathless, flowing style that can be both hypnotic and disorienting.
It sounds like he's trying to mimic the rhythm of thought, or maybe the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the West.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of that. He's not interested in traditional grammar or punctuation rules. He's trying to create a unique language that reflects the world he's depicting.
And he also doesn't use quotation marks for dialogue, right?
That's right. Which can make it a little tricky to follow the conversations at times, because you have to really pay attention to figure out who's speaking. But again, it contributes to that sense of disorientation, of being thrust into a world where the rules are different.
And what about the use of Spanish in the book? We mentioned that earlier, but it's worth revisiting.
Yeah, McCarthy is fluent in Spanish, and he incorporates it into the dialogue quite a bit. He doesn't always translate it, which adds another layer of complexity for the reader.
So it's not just about adding local color, it's about creating a more authentic experience.
Exactly. He wants the reader to feel immersed in the world of the borderlands, where language and culture are constantly colliding.
We've talked about nihilism and Gnostic tragedy as two possible interpretations of the book. For someone who's trying to decide whether or not to read Blood Meridian, can you briefly clarify how those two perspectives might shape their reading experience?
Sure. If you approach the book from a nihilistic perspective, you're likely to see it as a bleak and hopeless story about the meaninglessness of human existence. The violence will feel gratuitous, and the ending will feel like a confirmation of the idea that nothing really matters.
Okay, so definitely not a feel-good story.
Definitely not. But if you approach it from a Gnostic perspective, you might see the violence as a manifestation of a deeper cosmic flaw, a kind of inherent corruption in the material world. The ending might then feel like a kind of liberation, a transcendence beyond the suffering of this world.
So it all comes down to how you choose to interpret the story.
Exactly. There's no right or wrong answer, and McCarthy leaves a lot of room for individual interpretation.
So after this deep dive into the themes, the style, and the possible interpretations of Blood Meridian, who do you think should actually read this book?
Well, I think it's safe to say that it's not for everyone. If you're sensitive to violence, if you prefer straightforward narratives with clear-cut heroes and villains, or if you're just looking for a light and easy read, you're probably better off steering clear of this one.
It sounds like it's more of a book for people who are looking for a challenge, for something that will really make them think and feel things they might not be comfortable with.
Exactly. It's a book for people who are willing to confront the darkness, both within themselves and within the world. It's a book for people who are interested in exploring the limits of language and storytelling. It's a book for people who are looking for something truly unique and unforgettable.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today, but hopefully we've given you a better sense of what to expect from Blood Meridian.
I hope so. It's a book that's hard to summarize, but it's definitely a book that deserves to be discussed and debated.
Absolutely. And for those of you who do decide to take the plunge, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
And as you delve into the unsettling world of Blood Meridian, consider this. Their extreme violence in literature always serve a purpose. Can it ever be more than just gratuitous? Can it offer genuine insight into the human condition? Think about it and maybe ask yourself what your own personal meridian might be. What are your boundaries? What are your limits? What are the lines you're not willing to cross? It's something to ponder as you navigate the dark and challenging world of Blood Meridian.
And with that thought-provoking question, we'll wrap up our deep dive for today. Until next time, happy reading.
Happy reading indeed.